Hello listeners everywhere. Welcome to the Archive of Audio Antiquities, a voyage into the vault of wonders on the wireless. In a moment, Simon Exton and Ken Moss will be here to speak to you.
Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome. Thank you for joining us once again in the Archive of Audio Antiquities. I'm Ken Moss.
I'm Simon Exton.
What are we listening to this time, Dr. Exton?
We are listening to the Big Finish adaptations of Callan.
This was a series produced by Big Finish between 2018 and 2020.
There were 8 episodes across 2 box sets that dramatised some short stories that the original Callan author had written. So that's James Mitchell. He'd written them for publication in...
It was a newspaper,
it was one of the national newspapers. So Big Finish have adapted these. We were originally just going to listen to a few, and they are so good that certainly I blitzed all 8. Well, I'd heard them all before, because this was originally my suggestion, and then I went back and listened to them all again, expecting to just talk about the few that you chose, and then you galumphed your way through them.
The spoiler coming up, boys and girls, this is not going to be a very balanced review. I have never heard any of these before. I've only seen the pilot and 1 or 2 surviving ones of Series 1 of Callan, the TV series, because you did specifically say, don't listen to these before you've seen the TV version. So we watched a few for the Exton Moss Experiment, our other podcast on Archive TV, and loved them. The pilot was...
Magnum for Schneider.
That was for Armchair Theatre, wasn't it? Yeah. That just hit the ground running. All the characters in that, Callan himself, his section boss Hunter, Lonely, this sort of vagrant assistant that pops up periodically, Mears, they hit the screen completely fully formed.
Yeah.
And it's very rare for characters to do that. And as the series went on, well, we certainly saw the remaining fragments of the first series. I fell in love with that world. But having seen those scant few bits of the first series on telly and then listening to these, you were slightly sceptical about the casting of these audios when I first told you they were being produced, weren't you?
No, I was massively dubious because I thought Ben Miles, judging purely on his performance in Coupling, would be too posh to do Callan. And I was completely and utterly wrong. He puts in a brilliant performance.
It says here you're to give me the file labelled Deadshot. Does that mean anything to you?
Yes, I have it here. It's a red file, David.
Of course it is. They're the only ones I ever seem to get these days.
No, I'm sorry. It's just that he trusts you.
Yeah, like a spider trusts a fly.
Oh, no. I'm sure it's more than that. He knows you'll do a good job.
He knows I'm expendable, you mean? That's why he's sending me off into the middle of nowhere with a bunch of trigger-happy amateurs.
He's an audio dead ringer for Edward Woodward.
You are woo-wah.
I was waiting for that. Private in-joke, boys and girls. Yeah.
Why does Edward Woodward have 4 Ds in his name? Because without them, he's Iwawuwa. It's one of my brother-in-law's favourite jokes. As you can tell, family gatherings just fly by.
But anyway, and Frank Skinner, who I actually think is very underrated as an actor. Because whatever I've seen him in, it's not been an awful lot of things, but whenever I've seen him on screen or heard him acting, he is compelling in whatever he does. I mean, the only thing I've actually seen him in that I can remember is Doctor Who, Mummy on the Orient Express. He was wonderful as that. He's the companion that never was for me. But you listen to him in this, and he puts in a bloody good turn as Lonely.
He's brilliant. It's not as much of a dead ringer performance for...
Russell Hunter.
As Ben Miles is for Iwawuwa.
Hey, he's not a million miles off, though. He gets all the inflections they're there.
It's his take on the character rather than a very faithful recreation of the character, but he does it brilliantly, and it works brilliantly. The reason I suggested you watch at least the survivors of the first series before seeing this is because these audios assume that you know the setup of the section from the first second. Whereas Magnum for Schneider, the section is up and running, but it gives you time to understand the dynamics between Callan and Hunter, between Callan and Mears, and the development over the first season as well. And you really need to have that under your belt before you go into this to really properly appreciate it. And I think this is good enough to deserve proper appreciation.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, I've been a great fan of Big Finish stuff not since the beginning, because that was the Beneath stuff and I never listened to that, but certainly since the beginning of the Doctor Who stuff in 1999. I've listened to a lot less of the other stuff that they've done than you have, and you've sung the praises of things like the Tomorrow People before, Star Cops, which you introduced me to a little while ago. Brilliant, absolutely wonderful. The Avengers, which we binged the whole lot of. They remade the whole first series of The Avengers on audio, and I loved that.
And I would love them to do that for Callan, to use this cast, well, most of this cast. We will come on to that. For them to recreate the missing episodes of Callan.
I would agree with that, and I wish they'd taken this stance with Adam Adamant as well. You don't, because there's surviving episodes, and they would do those as well. I think you would.
Have you listened to the Big Finish Adam Adamant?
I have, and I really struggled through it, but it's not the script, is it? It's an interpretation of the script.
Bastardization, I think, is the way I put it.
Not unfairly. Adam Adamant is on the list to do in the future, and I'm not looking forward to that one.
It will be another
Lovecraft invasion.
Yeah, I was going to say another bitter pill one where we do a very good Big Finish afterwards as a way of saying, sorry,
this one
we don't actually hate you. See also The Secret of Dead Sin.
Oh dear. We have ripped certain ones to bits. Justifiably though. But this is one of those stable of audio series that I fell in love with straight away. The Avengers I absolutely adored. From the word go, I thought was bloody marvellous. Star Cops, which was an enjoyable but fairly ropey, forgettable TV series that hardly anybody remembers. But the audios are just sublime. And I think they expand on the Star Cops universe.
Oh, absolutely, because Star Cops, the TV series, was intended to spin off and go on to Mars and other places in the solar system. But the TV series was entirely set on the moon bases, a couple of satellites, and on Earth. Whereas once you've got to the Big Finish audios, then, yeah, it starts off with that. But for the second series, they go to Mars.
Yeah, which, again, I've heard bits. We are diversing a little way here, but it's just to say that Big Finish, when they've got the material and the writing, it just sounds brilliant. And this Callan series, they are hour-long episodes expanded from comic strips in the Sunday Express, presumably run over a few weeks at a time. And there's not a duffer. Of the 8 that we listened to, there was not one that I thought, that's a bit ropey. I think there's one that sticks out that I thought was a little interesting, but it certainly wasn't bad or not enjoyable. I think we are dancing around the fact that there is a third regular member of the cast.
Well, there are actually 5 regular members of the cast. We've talked
fair enough, yes.
We've talked about Callan, we've talked about Lonely. There's also Mears, Hunter, and Hunter's secretary, Liz. Now, do Liz first, because she's probably the easiest one to do, because she's not a major character. She becomes a more major character in the later series of Callan on TV. And she has a bit more to do in these episodes than she does in the early series, where she is very definitely just a secretary. But she's well played and effective. Mears is well played, but badly written. He comes across as a bumbling incompetent and the butt of jokes, whereas in the TV series, he's competent. He's not as competent as Callan, but he is good enough to be doing the job that he's doing. Now, in the TV series, he kind of comes across as very jealous of Callan and sociopathic/psychopathic. He comes across as both of those on audio, but without any of the competence to back it up. With the audio, you almost wonder why he's there in the first place. Whereas on video, it's very clear that why he's there. He likes killing and he's pretty good at it.
And it seems he's there to keep an eye on Callan. Because no one seems to, certainly in the TV version, no one seems to trust Callan just to get on with the job. And that seems to be Mia's role that I've seen so far.
And to a large extent, a self-appointed role for Mia's.
Yes, I suppose. Oh, yeah. Maybe. Hunter seemed to have a little bit of a...
Well, to start with, yes, and things like Magnum for Schneider. But by the time you're getting towards the end of the first series, it is the dysfunctional relationship between Mears and Callan that's the problem.
Right.
Which brings us on to the final regular, and the only one I have a problem with. And I think we both have a problem with this, but from different perspectives. So the final regular is played by Nick Briggs, the man of a million parts and one voice.
It is a problem for me. You see, I have a different take on Nicholas Briggs to you. I have no problem with him as an audio actor. I think whatever he's been perfectly acceptable. The first thing I remember hearing him in, sort of as Nicholas Briggs, was Minuet in Hell. He played a reporter from the London Torch. I've got Gideon Crane in my head, but that's not right. But he just crops up in everything.
Yes, we wonder how he gets the casting.
And I can understand the financial reasons for that, which is very sensible. The only trouble is that after 20 odd years, every single person that picks up a Big Finish audio knows exactly what Nick Briggs sounds like. And it's no different to me ripping apart Death on the Slipway, the Avengers audio, because they cast John Culshaw, a man who really is of 1,000 voices, but has 4 different parts within one audio play. Sometimes in the same scene and from scene to scene. Now, with the best will in the world, you can't get away from the fact that somebody does sound like their own voice, no matter how much you try to disguise it. It is quite hard unless you're using some sort of modulator or something, or they're extremely good at it. And unfortunately, Nick Briggs doesn't. There's only so many types of voice you can do. I mean,
One, apparently.
Well, I've narrated audiobooks for a long time and done voiceovers for a long time. And certainly one particular series I did for an author in Oregon, there were hundreds of characters. Well, there's only so many voices to go around. And you have to, in some way, make them sound different enough for the audience to believe that they're different characters. Eventually, you run out of voices. And people recognize, I mean, an audiobook's a different thing, but audio acting, it's just too recognizable. That's the problem.
A gunmaker called James Woodward and Sons designed the best over and under in Europe. Heard he manufactured them on license until 1949, when they bought Woodward out. These were made for my father in the early 50s. And we stop here. Let's see what you can do with a few clays. Obviously, it's not fitted for you, but I'm sure you'll manage.
Yeah, he's too recognisable because he has one performance, and every character he plays is the same performance. I don't think he's a particularly good actor. I think that you can have, I mean, particularly in the classic era of films, you had actors who were very one note and you knew exactly what you were getting, and sort of Noel Harrison.
Rex Harrison.
Sorry, Noel Harrison was his son.
Oh, I didn't know that. No.
He was the second lead in Girl from Auntie. Girl for Uncle. Girl from Auntie is the Avengers episode. Long way off track. So people like Rex Harrison, Cary Grant, they play exactly the same role every single time, and you know you're going to get that. But it's personality driven. It was big personality. They can get away with it because that one role that they play is dynamic and interesting.
Sorry, you just put me in mind there of Hugh Grant, who you know you're going to get every film. And Alistair McGowan did an impression of Hugh Grant doing the speaking clock.
At the third stroke, essentially the time where I should imagine, it'll be no, I'm almost certain, in fact, at the time. Bugger.
Sorry, that's miles off topic. Sorry, everyone.
With Nick Briggs, what you get is a very run-of-the-mill performance. Now, in most of the things, even bypassing any kind of casting because he owns the company, he still has sense enough to put himself in pretty small roles, except for this. And with Hunter, he's front and centre, and it doesn't work. He's up against the quality of Frank Skinner, of Ben Miles, and he just doesn't have the acting chops to compete with them on any level. Now, I can see what he's trying to do with the intonation he's putting into his voice, and he's trying to do a sort of George Sanders brooding menace. He doesn't. It comes out as a Camp Noel Coward.
I disagree with, well, it's just my opinion. I disagree with you on his performance. I've no bother with that. And at least in this series, he does play one part throughout. I think my main beef with Nick Briggs is he'll play a bit part in everything in a series. And that just does not work for me. And it wouldn't work if it was anybody.
I actually think he's a competent jobbing actor for secondary or tertiary roles, but he's not good enough to be front and centre. And to be fair to him, in most productions, he's not front and centre. Whether there is comments from other people from Big Finish, I have no idea, but he has sense enough not to put himself front and centre, except for this. Did you ever see the Probe series, the old BBV stuff?
I didn't dare.
No, they're quite fun, but
Right.
there's one where he's playing a policeman, I think, and he's playing against Caroline John, and compared to her performance, it just looks like amateur hour.
I still think that you can get away with a lot more on audio that you can't on video. Video or film will show up somebody's weaknesses very, very clearly. But they're two completely different disciplines. I mean, my personal preference for me would be audio. I just feel more comfortable with it. And I've acted on stage and seen recordings of myself on stage. I don't like it. I don't think I'm up there. I can see where you're coming from. I mean, he's an actor who's basically self-cast his way into fame, all the way going back to the old AV days on, the fan audios. So I can see where you're coming from, and I can see where, he's not... All right, fair dues, he isn't Ben Miles or Frank Skinner. They are big names, and he's playing one of three against them. And I can see why he's done it. It's just all the little bit parts, I think. I think it's more the fact there are so many of them and he's so recognisable. And I am not the first person to say this.
No, you're not. I don't have a problem with the same voices turning up in multiple different presentations because I can look at each one individually. And I don't do Big Finish after Big Finish after Big Finish after Big Finish. I listen to quite a bit of their stuff and I re-listen to an awful lot of their early stuff. But unless we were going to be doing something for one of these recordings, I wouldn't back-to-back Big Finish. I'd be putting other audio dramas, I'd be putting podcasts and things in the way. So I don't notice it as much as somebody who would do, I suppose, desperately trying to keep on top of their entire output because that's pretty much a full-time job these days.
I'm very selective about my Big Finish. It is purely the Doctor Who's, and I can't even keep up with the Doctor Who's. There's so many ranges being released all the time. I'd need another mortgage, I think.
God, this is going to sound awful. For me, it isn't the expense because I could afford to get... Yeah, exactly. I could afford to get a lot more of the Big Finish stuff than I do. I'm very selective and I buy almost nothing from Big Finish these days because you can't tell what's going to be crap and what isn't. And there is a terrible signal-to-noise ratio. So things that I was really looking forward to, like Missy, are dire and unlistenable. Things that I probably wouldn't have gone for in the first place, like the War Master. Master of Callis is a work of genius. And you can't predict by writer, you can't predict by actor, you can't predict by series. It's just random luck as to whether the thing that you're shelling out money for turns out to be listenable or not. And I have a limited amount of time and a lot of things I want to listen to. So if there's event stuff that I'm interested in, like we did the Det Sen one with Dodo being recast.
Yeah.
I got hold of the Lovecraft one because I love the setting of the Cthulhu mythos. And they were both car crashes. Those are my most recent experiences of Big Finish Doctor Who. They don't incline me to go and buy more.
I take your point on this because I do enjoy the ongoing series, and they've started now moving into box set territory. We're going away off Callan, but this is quite pertinent to audio drama in general and Big Finish's output. The box set series that they release, generally speaking, are quite rewarding. The Eighth Doctor stuff in particular, I think, has really rewarded the fan base for sticking with it because there's so many threads being woven through it, and it is an ongoing story arc about the Eighth Doctor and a period of his life. And they very much attempted to carve that out. The same with the War Doctor, the War Master, which that is the only spin-off I've actively dived into. And I'm glad I did. Primarily for Derek Jacobi. I make no apologies for that. I just love his performance. The rest of them, I just think, yeah, the main range went off the boil horrifically because there was not only the main range, as was before it came to an end, there was also all the spin-offs, all the other audios, and they're all written by the same people. So, as you would put it, you're overfishing a very small pond.
A small, fairly self-selected pond of, in a lot of cases, authors who can't get writing work elsewhere.
No, that's not to knock anybody.
Yes, it is.
Well, it is, but again, there's only so many ideas in one person's head.
I mean, I'm not going to name particular names on that. I think that would be a demonstration of the fact that I can't remember because I would have no problem naming names at all. And the thing I've said about Big Finish for years is that it sounds gorgeous. They have top-level actors coming in for Nick Briggs to pretend to be competent with.
You're a harsh man, Dr. Exton.
No, but everything about the dramas is well done. So performances, the sound design, the acting, it all sounds gorgeous and is always let down by the plot. And I can only think of one exception to that, and it was one of the Fourth Doctor and Leela stories in Budapest. Something of Buda.
Oh, the Buddha Castle.
Yeah, and the main villain in that is a vampire, and God knows who thought it was a good idea, but he does the entire performance sounding as though he's being strangled.
Do you know, I listened to that one specifically because you'd said that, and I couldn't hear it. Well, not to the way that you'd...
It's awful. And actually, it's not a bad performance, it's just a bad sound. It literally sounds as though he's being strangled for the entire time. And, okay, you've got all these Hungarian soldiers who've got Cockney accents, and that kind of drags you out a little bit. But the worst thing about it is the strangly voice thing, but we're getting a long way.
We are
Callan
getting a long way. And it's pertinent to Callan and indeed the Avengers that we just mentioned that they, in a lot of cases, well, certainly the Callan stuff was actually written by the original author of a fashion. And then
wasn't it adapted by his son?
His son, yes, who gives a wonderful interview on the end of one of the discs.
And actually, it's a measure of how engaged I was with this box set that I listened to that interview, because normally I'm not interested in that.
No, you don't do that at all. Oh, right. But I think that the original stuff that's being dragged up, this is why I want to see them do more lost material from original scripts, because I think
because that's been written by somebody competent.
Wasn't what I was going to say, but
it's what you were thinking.
I wasn't thinking that at all. I just thought it's a different writer from a different era, because these were all written in an era where they didn't have CGI to carry the can. It had to be story. It had to be dialogue. It had to be plot and performance that carried it over reliance on special effects. Because everything that we've watched, say from the 60s and 70s, that we've been a bit sort of calm on, has always had some element of hokey special effect in it that's let it down.
Not the spy stuff.
The Saint with the giant ants.
But that's science fiction.
I know, but that let down what was otherwise
a fairly dreadful episode.
But it was a low point in the series because they tried to do something that it just couldn't do, whereas the rest of it, where it was just reliant on spy, espionage, intrigue.
And by spy stuff, I don't mean the ITC Champions, Strange Report, Department S, all of those sort of borderline sci-fi things. I mean the gritty stuff like Callan going into the Sandbaggers, Mr. Palfrey of Westminster, Spooks. That whole run of gritty, originally Cold War, of its time spy drama has never needed special effects. It's always been plot and performance and quite a big chunk of misery.
Yeah, but that's why I'm very keen for stuff like Callan not to be continued. I don't like any of the continuations of Sherlock Holmes. Not liked a single one that I've heard or seen. I don't even like the Basil Rathbone stuff because it's all contemporary. And Sherlock Holmes is not contemporary. He's Victorian England, specifically Victorian London for a lot of the time.
Let's not get started talking about Sherlock.
No, it's not a Sherlock episode. No. But to continue those ranges, they always feel the temptation to sex them up a bit and go with very contemporary ideas and bigger and better and bolder and what could have been if they'd had the budget. Half of the charm of these things is the fact that they didn't have a budget.
Yeah. Survivors really falls into that category. It was brilliant for the first few series then, and there's one or two episodes that Louise Jameson has written that are just absolutely outstanding. But it gets to be bigger and more dramatic plots, and it gets to the point where there's the series villain who survives being ill and kicked off a boat in the middle of the English Channel and then managed to swim to shore and then turns up again and get blown up in a car or a lorry or something and then turns up again. It's proper Captain Scarlet stuff, and it's just massively over the top in a way that the original TV series of Survivors wasn't. Again, a long way away from Callan.
Yes. You see, I loved the fact that the ones that I've seen, the TV ones, there was no action sequences in them. It was all suspense and dialogue and interaction and menace rather than pew, 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 There was none of that, car chases. There was none of that because they couldn't afford to do it.
And these
It had to
audios
be.
are as well.
Yes, but again, they were written in an era. I mean, these are from the late 60s, early 70s, these.
Early 70s. I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and it shows because they were written. I mean, obviously, comic strip, they could have got away with more. Usually comic strips do have the odd action panel in where it is all pew-pew and motorbike chases and the odd explosion here and there. None of these are. And I think that the way that the scripts have been adapted benefits massively from the fact that it's not from an era where it needed to be that. I mean, you look at any comic strip now, I'm not a comic fan, but you look at any comic strip now, let's just take that. Even now, they've got to be, basically, this is what it would look like if it was on television. It's all glorious special effects and colossal settings, and it's all lost. Because really, a comic strip has got the dialogue to carry it. No matter how pretty the pictures are, it does need a good story to carry it. These are remarkably well adapted, considering they're only going to be from a few dozen panels. I think these are really, really well done. I was completely engaged with all of them.
Yeah, but it's the setting and the performance that you engage with. The plots themselves are pretty bland.
It's fair. I can't remember a one apart from one with, which is one with that centered around a woman, a wife, a widow, or something, and it was all very much. Again, it was of its time, but to me...
Like the Mourning Mother, because they've all got alliterative
titles. I think it was that one. All the way through, it was along the lines of, well, it couldn't possibly be a woman that's committed this crime. No, how could a woman, poor woman, couldn't have committed it? No, she's perfectly innocent. And all the way through, it's not her in the end, I don't think, but it's...
No. There are two women in that, because it's the death of a government scientist that they're investigating, and the two women are his co-worker and his mother. And suspicion is pointed at both of them at different points, and spoiler, it turns out to be somebody else. The actress playing the mother in particular puts in a superb performance, and there's this very good car crash of a scene between her and Callan at the beginning, where Callan is basically trying to do some grief counselling and doing a dreadful job of it. Because one of the very first things that you learn when you're dealing with these kind of conversations is never say, I understand. Even if you've been through very, very similar experiences, it's always a light blue touch paper comment. If somebody is that raw, the last thing that they're going to appreciate is that somebody else has been similarly raw. Now, that's not true 100% of the time, because people aren't exactly the same. There may well be some people who appreciate that, but the times I've seen junior doctors use that particular line usually end up getting them smacked around the head with it. I mean, not physically, but metaphorically. It is something that we just do not say. But Callan isn't supposed to be a grief counsellor, and he makes a point of saying, I shouldn't be the one going and doing this, but he supports her because nobody else is doing it.
The thing is, the ministry likes these things to be thoroughly checked out by its own people. And sometimes, like today, it's a very unpleasant job, intrusive. And 99 times out of 100, it's purely a formality. Believe me, I'm so sorry to have to sit here asking painful questions, but your son was a scientist, Mrs. Brown. He was an extremely accomplished scientist, and he worked for us in a particularly sensitive area.
He told me. He didn't go into details, of course. It was something to do with jump jets. Are you something to do with the security services?
Oh, no. Nothing as exotic as that, I'm afraid. I just tie up loose ends, that's all.
There's generally a very good support cast and a very competent support cast. And a really good example of that is one of the earlier ones where there's 5 or 6 male characters all in an individual scene. It's the one where they're at the hunting expedition.
Yeah.
And there is absolutely no confusion between who the different characters are.
No.
Even though, as I say, there's 5 or 6 male characters in that same scene. And they're so well played that you know exactly who is who.
Morning, gentlemen. Hello, Callan. Oh, Purdy's, I see. How very grand.
That's right, and quite old by the look of them.
I think you'll find they still work.
Nothing wrong with old guns, Callan. Mine are ancient, but in my view, they improve with age.
Oh, like good wine?
Hardly. The problem with good wine is that it runs out. A first-class sporting gun will always be there for you, if you look after it. Just like the land itself.
That's the gentry speaking. I wouldn't mind a pound for every acre of your place, Lorimer.
You know nothing about it. There's more to owning land than making money, Mins. There's heritage, responsibility, hard work. That's why some of us just weren't cut out to be tradespeople.
Oh, no, gentlemen. Save it for the field.
Giving them a final wipe down, eh, Callan?
Yep.
They're beautiful. I'm so looking forward to seeing them in action. Well, good morning, gentlemen. Perfect day for the gun. Light, bright, and barely a puff of wind.
At least that's something. Last time we nearly got blown off the estate.
Well, not today. Conditions are nigh on perfect. Come along.
I think there are times that it could do with a tighter edit, and that's particularly true in the first episode where Lonely's in his bath. And you get about 2 minutes of just sort of splooshing noises.
That particular scene did stick out. Now, generally speaking, I'm a fan of slightly looser editing in audio dramas because it does give things time to breathe if they're not in a way that I don't agree with something like a podcast. I think podcasts should be nice and tight.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that was coming. But with an audio
really?
Anyone got a blank tape?
What are you calling it?
In the early Big Finish, I'm just trying to get away from this. They used to have sort of little musical interludes. They weren't very often, but every now and again you get a little musical pause between scenes. And it was quite nice. It was almost as if you were watching a TV episode without the pictures. And so you would have got those lengthy The bath incident in that episode with Lonely, I agree, it went on a fraction too long.
Far too long.
It could have done to be scaled down a bit. I don't think we needed every drip of running a bath.
I actually got to the point of thinking, am I listening to this on CD and has it slipped?
So I'm a great fan of that. I do take your point for that particular scene, but on the whole, I actually like... What was I listening to the other night? And it was The Light at the End. I don't know why. I was looking through my Big Finish app and it was on there. I thought, well, go on, I've not heard that for years. I'll give it a listen. And about the first 2 minutes, you get this sort of pseudo title sequence, which isn't. It's just a piece of music. But you mentally fill in the gaps of what might be happening on screen for that. And then there's a nice, gentle introduction where nothing happens apart from sound effects for about 10 or 20 seconds, rather than bang, straight into the dialogue. Here's the scene. Oh, look, Mother, it's a nice day outside. Yes, it is. Shall we go for a drive in that silver car? I like those pauses on audio drama.
Oh, I agree. And I think and particularly partway through the drama, they give you a chance to sort of mentally process what you've just heard before moving on to other things. I think it can work well. I just think there were instances, and that was the most obvious one, where the editing could have been a little bit tighter.
We will be true to you. Tell me.
Hang on a minute, I'm coming.
You took your time.
Oh, it's you, Mr. Callan. Get inside quick, Mr. Callan. It's bloody freezing. I was having a bath, you see.
With your cap on?
I only take it off when I'm going to bed or for funerals. Have a seat. I forgot I had this. It's my robe.
Yeah, I can see that. It's got Puff the Magic Dragon stitched all over the back of it. Goes well with your cap.
Yeah, I nicked it from a massage parlour up west. Real silk and all. Now, what can I do for you, Mr. Callan?
In this particular series, there's a possibility that they were just trying to make the episodes artificially a bit longer. I can't say that it stood out for me that there were any significant loose bits, and you know perfectly well that I do listen out for stuff like that. So the bath scene, I'll admit, did stick
the one in Monaco, Monte Carlo, Nice, south of France, wherever it was, where they're out on the ocean and jumping about from boat to boat to boat, there were quite a lot of slooshy boat noises.
Oh, I don't remember that.
And the one in Venice as well.
I see Diana's are very popular this year.
Bet you're glad you changed your mind then.
Very funny, Callan. Hey now, take a look over to starboard. Wasn't that our friend, Lubov?
It was. Along with a dozen or so of his mates. The Russian contingent obviously feels gondolas are bourgeois deviationists.
Well, maybe they're just showing off.
Again, I've either got completely absorbed in it or just not noticed, which is unusual. But again,
those ones weren't as bad as the
splooshy bath.
Splooshy bath. It's all splooshy noises.
It's all splooshy. But I do tend to get, because I listen to all my audio stuff, with the exception of The Archers, which I tend to listen to while I'm shaving. All my audio dramas I do tend to listen to in candlelight, in the dark, with headphones on, and get completely immersed in the world. So I do sort of let the audio paint a picture. So possibly I don't notice the pauses or the lengthy interim bits.
Whereas I tend to listen to stuff while I'm driving to and from work.
Which is going to stand out a country mile then, yeah.
Yeah, because if I were to try to listen at home, I'd get about 2 minutes before I'd be interrupted by a question about the cat or something like that.
We are going on a long time and we've gone all around the houses. Do you have any further notes, Dr.
I do.
Mason?
The episode in Newcastle, why do the Geordie thugs have London accents?
Can I help you, gentlemen? You're not supposed to be back here, you know.
Hey, what's this, Charlie?
A gorilla, is it? We want the organ grinder, mate. Oh, here, Bonnie lad. Who are you calling a gorilla?
The use of Shin Beth as an adversary to the Israeli Secret Service is very much of its time. And I don't think there's any television company that would think that that's a good thing to do now.
But it's only the same as that Avengers episode. Was it the radioactive man where... Was it the Russians? Who, yes, they can be trusted. They're perfectly all right, the Russians. About 3 years before the Cold War or something. Because we both commented on it. Oh, no, it wasn't. It was the IRA.
Well, at the time that was done, there wouldn't have been a realistic IRA.
No, but it was just reference to Northern Ireland in general, wasn't it? It was terribly favourable.
It was a character who was trying to escape and flying to Belfast as the
safest,
as the safest and easiest way of getting out of the country.
That was it.
The other IRA thing that we've seen is the unfortunate episode of Undermined.
Oh, yes.
with the pre-Mrs. Tyler Looney Old Trout. We have a Exton Moss episode on Undermined coming up at some point.
But it is the little windows in time, and it's kudos to Big Finish when they do this and don't edit it out. So I like all this.
Yeah, I mean, it's like Chess Game wouldn't be made now because the Israelis were the adversaries. And I think if any production company were to do that, then there would be such
anti-Semitism,
desperate and massive outcry of anti-Semitism that anybody would run scared. I've been really picky and had very, very little to pick about. This was brilliant.
I don't really have anything bad to say about it. It's one of the most enjoyable series, and it's a mark of how quickly I got through it. Bear in mind that it's 8 hours long. I burned through it in a couple of days and loved it, and I seem to remember gushing to you about it at the time on Messenger. I think it's probably time we rated this in earworms.
This is the song that never ends. Yes, it goes on and on, my friends.
Well, I'm going to give it 9. It's not quite 10 territory, but it's bloody close. I really, really loved this. Ben Miles does a superb performance. He's certainly a worthy successor to Edward Woodward.
Iwa Wuwa.
Iwa Wuwa. I would love to hear them do more of the missing stuff with this cast.
Yeah.
Please, no original stuff, but yes, remake. Certainly, is it the first series?
Yeah, first and second series
have got gaps.
Episodes.
Yeah. And I know that you would only like the missing ones to be done. I can understand why.
If they were to get in somebody from outside the Big Finish stable who can actually write this sort of stuff.
I don't know. I think it muddies the water when they start continuing. This is anybody. It's certainly not level just at Big Finish. When anybody continues a story, I just don't think they ever quite get it.
I agree that for continuing single author series. So I hate the new Poirots that have been released. I think they are
New Poirots?
Yeah, there's somebody who's... and she's an established...
No. Don't care who she is. Not interested. No.
Well, I mean, she's obviously not a successful enough writer to have a successful series in her own right, so she gegged on to the Agatha Christie stuff. Sophie somebody or other, I think her name is. But she's written new Poirot stories, and I read the first one, and it wasn't Poirot. It wasn't an Agatha Christie-style plot. The whole plot revolved around linguistic semantics, which isn't an Agatha Christie-type thing. And it just came across as somebody else's novel with the name Poirot copy and pasted in as a way of selling more copies. When you've got something like a TV series where you've had multiple writers, where you've had multiple creative inputs, I think that becomes less of a thing. And what you need is a writer who is able to write in that style. Now, I don't know if Big Finish have anybody in-house house who could write in this kind of style.
I'm just sceptical of... The only exception to that, I would say, is Star Cops, that I've seen and thought, actually, they brought it back and it's better than it was before. And you've said the same about Tomorrow People.
Well, Tomorrow People was excellent. The Omega Factor is pretty good. Sapphire and Steel was unbelievably bad. Survivors started off well, but just veered down into the kind of problem that the early years of the rebooted Doctor Who ran into, in that each series has to be bigger and better and greater threat. And you don't need that.
No, you don't.
Countermeasures is very good as well.
Oh, I have heard some of those, yes.
Or was up to a point. The new rebooted Countermeasures didn't work. And Sarah Jane Adventures that Big Finish did were pretty good.
Middle. I wasn't overly gripped by the Sarah Jane stuff. But yeah. So I've given it 9. How many are you going to give it?
I was tempted to give it 9 because most of it is so good, but because...
Oh, I know where this is going.
Because of the terrible, terrible performance of Hunter, I'm going to drop it down to an 8. It's still good. It's still listenable. If they had a competent actor playing that lead role, then it would be a 9. But they don't, and it isn't.
And they'll continue singing it forever just because.
It's time for you to recommend something for us to listen to.
Podcast of the week. Podcast of the week for this month is called Florida Men on Florida Man.
Way down upon the Swanee River, far, far away.
It's a wonderfully entertaining American podcast taking the piss out of Florida.
Okay.
And it is Floridians taking the piss out of the ridiculous stuff that other Floridians get up to. It is incredibly entertaining. Oh, they came out with one of the most laugh-out-loud quotes that I've come across in ages, which is, anything's a dildo if you're brave enough. Talking about a newspaper article about a Florida woman who'd hidden a venomous snake in her knickers.
Okay. Well, that's only going to end one way, isn't it? Or 2 ways, possibly. Right.
It's a lot of fun. Well worth checking out.
You're better at this listening to other pods than I am. I'm too busy editing. But coming up next month, what have we got?
We are going to go back to some classic BBC radio sitcom.
Would this be Hut 33 by any chance?
This is Hut 33. And Hut 33 was one of the first radio sitcoms that I listened to. I'd listened to a lot of radio sketch comedy before then. But Hut 33 and the Maltby Collection were radio comedies that I listened to very early on, and I have very fond memories of Hut 33. Now, I've not listened to it for ages.
This has been on the list for years.
Since the beginning, yes, absolutely. So, Hut 33.
I shall put it in the... I don't know anything about it, so this is going to be a complete virgin territory for me. Until next time, boys and girls, thank you very much for staying the course. We have been a lot longer than usual, but
we've had a lot of predominantly good stuff to say about Callan.
Yes, it's heartily recommended. This is a great range from Big Finish. So, yeah, thumbs up. Thank you again, everyone. We'll speak to you soon. Ta-ta.
Bye now.
The Archive of Audio Antiquities featured Simon Exton and Ken Moss, and the announcer was Jenny at Blue Box 99. All featured soundtracks are the property of their respective producers, and no infringement of copyright is intended. Title music was by Edward White, and the programme was produced by Maverick Productions. For more information, please visit maverickproductionsuk.blogspot.com or find us on social media.